For centuries, the Roman army marched across the known world, crushing enemies, expanding borders, and etching its name into the bones of history. We know about the great triumphs, Caesar and Gall Augustus in Egypt, Trajan in Dacia, and of course the disasters, Teutoburg, Forest, Carrhae, Cannae. But hidden among these legendary campaigns lies a story almost completely erased by time, a Roman invasion so ill-fated that even the empire itself tried to forget it. Today we're unearthing one of Rome's most obscure military ventures, the invasion of Arabia Felix, led by the ambitious but doomed Aelius Gallus in 26 BC. Before we dive in, a quick word about Magellan TV, the sponsor of this episode. They're a streaming platform built by filmmakers who actually love documentaries. You'll find over 3,000 titles covering history, science, space, nature, and more. If you're into ancient history like this video, check out Arabia, Land of Illusion. It's an incredible visual journey through the kind of harsh deserts and bustling markets Roman soldiers would have seen 2,000 years ago. Magellan TV works on all your favorite devices: Roku, Fire TV, Apple TV, Google Play, iOS, you name it, right now. You can grab 30% off an annual membership starting with a 2-week free trial. That's less than $3.50 a month for unlimited access to thousands of high-quality docs. The offer works for both new and returning users. Just click the link in the description or visit Try. Magellan TV, Com Invicta. All right, let's step back in time to the edge of the Roman world. In the eyes of the Romans, Arabia was a mysterious frontier, a land of heat, sand, and myths. Ancient writers described it as a place of wandering tribes, strange customs, and unimaginable wealth. Pliny the Elder once wrote that its nomads lived off milk and wild game, that others made wine from palm trees, oil from sesame, and that its warriors wore turbans, their hair unshorn and beards shaved, but mustaches left to grow long. Over time, the Romans began dividing the Arabian Peninsula into 3 distinct regions: Arabia Petraea, the stony northwestern borderlands connecting Egypt and the Levant; Arabia Deserta, the endless, empty wilderness of the interior; and Arabia Felix, literally fortunate Arabia, the green and fertile south. Arabia Petraea, thanks to its trade routes and oasis cities like Aqaba and Petra, was already familiar to the Romans. It was home to the Nabateans, expert merchants who controlled the incense trade routes flowing between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. Arabia Deserta, on the other hand, was the Romans' idea of a nightmare: vast dunes, burning sun, and no end in sight. Yet even there, Bedouin tribes had survived for millennia, moving with their herds, trading with distant neighbors, and occasionally raiding travelers foolish enough to wander too far. And then there was Arabia Felix, the prize everyone dreamed about. It was richer, greener, and more developed than any other part of the peninsula. Thanks to more frequent rains, its kingdoms, Saba, Himyar, and Kataban cultivated crops, built cities, and traded luxuries. The Romans could only imagine gold, silver, myrrh, frankincense, cinnamon, and rare spices that perfumed the palaces of kings. To the Romans, this region glittered like a mirage, a place overflowing with wealth, but sitting just beyond their reach. For most of Rome's history, Arabia was a name on a map, distant, exotic, and unimportant. That changed in the 1st century BC, when Rome began expanding eastward after conquering Egypt and Judea. Roman merchants soon realized something extraordinary was happening. The Indian Ocean trade was exploding. Goods from India, Africa, and Arabia were flowing north into Roman markets in staggering quantities. Strabo, the Greek geographer, noted that under the Ptolemies, only a handful of ships had made the trip to India, but by Augustus's reign, fleets in the hundreds sailed every year. In short, there was money to be made, a lot of it. Roman traders were already cashing in, but the imperial government lagged behind. Augustus Caesar, newly crowned as Rome's first emperor after decades of civil war, was eager to prove himself as a builder of peace and prosperity, but also as a conqueror of new lands. He wanted new frontiers to pacify, new gold to fund his empire, and new victories to display on triumphal arches. Arabia, rich and mysterious, looked like the perfect target. To lead this expedition, Augustus turned to one of his loyal governors in Egypt, Aelius Gallus, the prefect of the province. Gallus had big shoes to fill. His predecessor, Cornelius Gallus, had done well rebuilding Egypt's administration, but got too proud for his own good. He started putting up monuments glorifying himself, which Augustus took as a personal insult. The punishment: forced suicide. Aelius Gallus was determined not to repeat that mistake. He would be loyal, cautious, and most importantly, successful. When Augustus gave him the order to invade Arabia in 26 BC, Gallus saw it as both a duty and an opportunity. If he could pull it off, he'd be remembered forever as the man who brought the fabled lands of Arabia under Roman rule. But there was a catch. No one in Rome really knew what Arabia looked like. Maps were vague, distances unreliable, and the terrain largely uncharted. Gallus's only major ally was the Nabatean kingdom, whose merchants and guides promised to help navigate the deserts. The emperor's instructions were simple, explorer. Arabia established friendly relations where possible and conquer if necessary. In other words, bring back wealth, glory, and information. Gallus got to work immediately. Surviving papyrus records from Egypt show that blacksmiths were ordered to produce weapons on a massive scale, while the prefect began recruiting troops for the campaign. He couldn't strip Egypt's garrisons. The province was Rome's breadbasket, and too vital to leave undefended. So he took only a portion of the existing legions, adding local auxiliaries and mercenaries to build an army of about 10,000 men. But the biggest challenge wasn't manpower, it was logistics. How do you march an army into one of the driest regions on Earth? You need supplies, and lots of them: food, water, weapons, and ships. Yes, ships. Gallus planned to move part of his forces by sea down the Red Sea toward the Arabian coast. There was just one problem: Egypt had no Red Sea fleet. The Ptolemies before him had focused all their naval power on the Mediterranean. There were no warships, no shipyards, and not even the right kind of timber. So Gallus improvised. Instead of building a new navy from scratch, he tried to move ships from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, a logistical nightmare in the ancient world. There was no Suez Canal, yet only an old, half-buried waterway from pharaonic times called the Canal of the Pharaohs, connecting the Nile to the Bitter Lakes. Some historians believe Gallus had it partially reopened, hauling ships across in sections or towing them through whatever shallow channels remained. However he did it, it worked at least partially. Eventually, Gallus had assembled a fleet of around 130 transport ships loaded with men, weapons, and supplies. When everything was ready, Gallus ordered his fleet to sail south to the Nabatean port of Leucocome, their staging point for the invasion. From the very beginning, things went wrong. The Gulf of Suez was infamous for its shifting winds and rocky coastlines. Roman ships built for the calm Mediterranean struggled in the harsh Red Sea conditions. They couldn't beach at night, had trouble finding fresh water, and were constantly fighting headwinds that pushed them backward. The journey should have taken a few days. It took 15. Ships were wrecked on the reefs. Many soldiers fell sick, likely from scurvy due to poor rations. Ancient sources blame the local herbs and water, but we know today it was malnutrition. Modern historians look at this and shake their heads. Marching overland from Judea would have been easier and safer. The Nabateans could have handled supplies along desert routes they'd used for centuries. So why didn't Gallus do that? According to the ancient historian Strabo, it was the fault of Gallus's Nabatean guide, Silius, who supposedly hated the Romans and deliberately misled them. It's a convenient story. Commanders often blame guides for their own mistakes, but there may be some truth to it. Either way, the Roman invasion hadn't even reached Arabia yet, and it was already falling apart. By the time the battered fleet finally limped into Leucocome, morale was low and supplies were running thin. Worse, the campaigning season, the short period when weather and terrain allowed movement, was nearly over. Gallus had no choice but to camp for the rest of the year, waiting for the cooler months. It was a humiliating start, but when spring came, he was determined to redeem himself. The prefect ordered his army southward again, still trusting the Nabatean guide Silius, a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The Roman army finally began its march into Arabia, carrying the emperor's ambitions and its own growing fatigue. At first, the terrain seemed passable, but soon the harshness of the desert revealed itself. Days blended into weeks as the legions stumbled forward through blinding heat, their supplies dwindling faster than expected. Strabo later wrote that Gallus had to transport water on camels because the route was so barren and unreliable, a logistical nightmare from the start. The Nabatean guide Silius continued to lead them, claiming to know the way. But what Gallus didn't realize was that this path, the one he trusted with the lives of thousands, wound deep through some of the most desolate lands on Earth. Each step forward meant days lost and more men falling ill from thirst, exhaustion, and disease. The Romans pushed through regions described as offering nothing but scattered palm trees and a few patches of grass. Their oil was gone, so they used butter to cook their food. Even the camels began to collapse. Yet Gallus kept marching, desperate to reach a destination that seemed to shift like a mirage in front of him. After 30 brutal days, they reached the territory of a local ruler named Aretas, who greeted them peacefully and offered gifts. For a brief moment, it seemed fortune had turned, but Silius's guidance once again led them astray. The Romans continued deeper into the desert, through trackless stretches of sand where the wind erased every footprint behind them. The heat was relentless. The journey, Strabo recorded, took 50 days of starvation, parched throats, and endless marching. When the surviving columns finally emerged from the wilderness, they arrived at a city called Negrana, fertile green, and full of life compared to the wasteland they'd crossed. For the first time in months, soldiers could breathe. The local king fled rather than face the Romans, and the city fell easily. But Gallus knew this victory meant little. His army was battered, malnourished, and sick. Yet ahead of him lay the promise of Arabia Felix, the wealthy southern lands that had driven Augustus's obsession. He couldn't stop now. The Romans pushed onward, reaching a river after 6 days. There, local warriors finally stood against them, perhaps believing the exhausted army could be broken. But despite all their suffering, the Romans were still the Romans. They fought with discipline and precision, annihilating their opponents. Strabo claims 10,000 Arabs were killed in the battle, while only 2 Romans fell. It was a staggering display of military superiority, but also a hollow one. The enemy's weapons were crude, their tactics uncoordinated. The real danger wasn't in battle, it was in the journey itself. From there, Gallus continued his march, capturing city after city Asca. Athrula, each one falling without much resistance. In Athrula, he left a Roman garrison to guard supplies of grain and dates, trying to secure a lifeline for the way back. Then moving further south, he reached a city called Marciaba, held by the tribe of the Ramanitai. This was where the dream of Arabia Felix finally began to collapse. Gallus laid siege to Marciaba, threatening to destroy it if the people refused to surrender. But his men were starving, sick, and exhausted. The siege dragged on for 6 days before he was forced to abandon it, not because of the enemy's strength, but because his army was dying faster than it could fight. And yet, even as he retreated, Gallus could see the shimmer of fertile lands not far beyond the horizon. Strabo wrote that captured locals told him he was only a few days away from the green. Rich cities of Arabia, Felix, the heart of the spice trade, the place Augustus had dreamed of conquering. But Gallus understood what that meant. Those cities would be ready, well supplied, and heavily defended. His troops, on the other hand, were collapsing where they stood. If he advanced, he risked annihilation. If he turned back, he faced the fury of Augustus. Either choice could kill him, one in the desert, the other back in Rome. Gallus hesitated, torn between glory and survival. Then, facing the truth of his situation, he made the hardest decision a Roman commander could make: retreat. The army rallied what little strength it had left and began the long march north. Supplies were nearly gone. Water ran out within days. Men fell behind and never got up again. But in a rare stroke of luck, they discovered a different route, one that was shorter, less deadly, and took only 60 days instead of the 6 months it had taken to get there. It was along this path that Gallus realized the full scale of the betrayal. The Nabatean guide Silius had led them on a cruel detour through the most inhospitable regions of Arabia. Whether out of hatred or political cunning, he had sabotaged the expedition from the start. And now, as the Romans finally stumbled their way home, that treachery became undeniable. The survivors eventually reached the coast and crossed the Red Sea to Myos Hormos in just 11 days. From there, they marched overland back to Coptos and finally to Alexandria. Of the 10,000 men who had set out with Gallus, only a fraction returned. Strabo wrote that nearly all the deaths were from disease, hunger, and fatigue, not from battle. Fewer than 10 soldiers had fallen in combat during the entire campaign. The rest had been consumed by the desert itself. When Gallus finally returned to Egypt, he was a broken man. His once proud expedition had become a catastrophe. He knew that news of failure spread quickly in Rome, and that Augustus had little tolerance for humiliation. So Gallus did what Roman commanders often did: he blamed someone else. He accused Silius of treachery, producing evidence that the guide had intentionally misled them, extorted them, and betrayed Roman interests. The story fit perfectly. Augustus needed a scapegoat, not another scandal. Silius was brought to Rome, tried, and executed, beheaded for his crimes against the empire. Gallus, meanwhile, kept his head, but not his reputation. He was dismissed quietly, fading into obscurity. The entire expedition was buried under silence. No monuments, no triumphs, no songs. Augustus made sure of that. The campaign into Arabia was never mentioned among Rome's glories. It was as if it had never happened. The failure was total, but what's remarkable is how little it changed Rome's approach to power. The empire didn't abandon its ambitions. It simply learned to pursue them differently. Instead of invading Arabia by force, Rome turned to something it was equally good at: trade. Over the next century, Roman merchants and sailors expanded their reach across the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, connecting ports from Egypt to India. They built alliances with local kingdoms, set up trading stations, and turned the same deserts that had killed their soldiers into routes for wealth. Rome never conquered Arabia Felix with legions, but it did conquer it economically. In the end, the invasion of 26 BC was a failure not of courage, but of hubris. Gallus had led his men into a land he didn't understand, chasing a mirage drawn by greed and imperial pride. His army didn't fall to an enemy army, it fell to the desert to thirst, and to the arrogance of believing that Rome's power had no limits. The story faded quickly. Overshadowed by Augustus's propaganda of peace and prosperity, the soldiers who died were auxiliaries, local recruits, men without names or statues. Rome simply forgot them, but the sands of Arabia remembered. If there's one lesson in this forgotten war, it's that even the greatest empire on earth could lose not to swords or spears, but to silence, distance, and the limits of its own ambition. The Roman invasion of Arabia Felix was never sung in triumph, never carved in marble. It was erased, buried under the sands where so many had fallen. Yet for a brief burning moment in history, Rome's reach exceeded its grasp, and the desert answered with death. When the survivors of the Arabian campaign finally staggered back into Alexandria, they were barely recognizable as Roman soldiers. Their armor was corroded, their sandals shredded, their skin burned and blistered by months beneath the desert sun. Many could no longer walk without help. The proud legionaries who had once set out in tight formation now resembled ghosts drifting through the city streets hollow-eyed, malnourished and broken. The news reached Rome slowly wrapped in silence. There were no victory parades, no triumphs, no speeches before the Senate. Augustus, the man who had built his image as a bringer of peace and order, wanted nothing to do with this disaster. In his official records, he simply ignored it. For him, the Arabian campaign did not exist. Aelius Gallus, the man who had commanded it, retreated from public life. He wasn't executed, but he was quietly dismissed and never again trusted with high command. For Rome, he became an inconvenient name, a reminder of a war that had swallowed thousands and achieved nothing. The guide Silius, blamed for everything, was hauled to Rome and publicly tried. The accusations were endless: deceit, corruption, betrayal. Whether or not he truly led the Romans astray no longer mattered. The emperor needed a villain. Silius was found guilty and beheaded. Gallus lived, but his career was over. And so ended one of Rome's most futile adventures, an invasion that had lasted barely 2 years, but cost countless lives and accomplished nothing beyond revealing how vast the world beyond Rome truly was. The Arabian campaign vanished from popular memory almost immediately. No monuments were built to honor the fallen. No poets celebrated the expedition. The empire simply erased it from its story, the same way it erased the names of disgraced emperors and defeated generals. Yet, the consequences of that failure quietly reshaped the empire's strategy for the next centuries. Instead of conquering Arabia by force, Rome turned its attention to trade. It realized that gold, frankincense, and myrrh could flow north more easily through commerce than conquest. Merchants replaced legionaries. Ships replaced spears. The Red Sea became Rome's silent highway, carrying goods from India, East Africa, and southern Arabia to ports like Myos, Hormuz, and Berenice, and then across the desert by camel caravans to the Nile. From there, the wealth of Arabia flowed straight into Alexandria and then to Rome itself. In the end, Augustus got what he wanted. The riches of Arabia entered his empire not through conquest, but through commerce. Rome's appetite for the exotic spices, silks, perfumes, ivory turned Arabia Felix into one of the most profitable trading partners of the ancient world. It was a quieter kind of domination, built not on blood, but on economics. Still, the ghosts of Gallus's men haunted the empire. The story survived in whispers, preserved by geographers like Strabo and Pliny, who mentioned it almost reluctantly, as if afraid to remind the world that Rome could fail. But buried within that failure was a truth the empire never wanted to face. Not every frontier could be tamed. Not every desert crossed. Not every kingdom subdued. The sands of Arabia had drawn a line even Rome could not pass. It's easy to imagine the moment Gallus realized this, standing on a barren ridge looking out across an endless horizon, his men dying one by one. He had chased a legend of wealth and glory and found only emptiness. The empire's arrogance had met nature's indifference, and nature had won. For centuries afterward, Roman mapmakers left southern Arabia drawn in faint outlines, a blank space filled with speculation and rumor. Some called it the land of the blessed, others the land beyond the sands. But to those who had seen it, it was something far more human, a graveyard of ambition. And yet this forgotten war deserves to be remembered. Not because it changed the course of history, but because it reveals the limits of even the greatest empire mankind had ever seen. Gallus's campaign reminds us that for all Rome's roads, legions, and gods, there were still places it could not conquer, places that humbled its pride. Every empire meets its desert, eventually a point where power, wealth, and glory dissolve into dust. For Rome, that desert was Arabia Felix. Strabo, who recorded the campaign, ended his account not with condemnation, but with quiet reflection. He wrote that the expedition had brought little knowledge of the region, but still it made a slight contribution. That small phrase, a slight contribution, feels almost tragic. Tens of thousands of lives reduced to a footnote. An entire campaign remembered only as a mistake. But in that failure lay a lesson Augustus could never ignore. His successors would remember it too. When later emperors dreamed of conquering the unknown Parthia, Ethiopia, India, they would pause and think of Gallus. They would send ambassadors instead of armies, merchants instead of centurions. Rome had learned that it could not fight the desert. It could only trade with it. Even centuries later, the echoes of that decision shaped the world. Through trade, the Romans connected with civilizations far beyond their borders, the Parthians, the Indians, even the Chinese. The same routes Gallus once struggled to march became arteries of exchange, carrying silk, spices, and ideas that transformed the ancient world. It's strange to think that one of the empire's greatest failures might have paved the way for its most enduring achievements. The disaster in Arabia forced Rome to look outward, not as a conqueror, but as a participant in a global network. It began to see power not just as the sword, but as influence, trade, and diplomacy. Of course, none of that mattered to the men who died there. To them, the desert was not a lesson, it was a grave. Their names were never written, their stories never told. Only the wind remembers them, whispering across dunes that still hide their bones. Maybe that's why this story resonates today, because it isn't just about Rome. It's about human ambition, about the endless drive to push farther, to conquer, to control, and about the quiet truth that the world doesn't bend to our will just because we believe it should. The invasion of Arabia Felix is more than a lost campaign. It's a mirror showing us the limits of empire, the fragility of certainty, and the cost of forgetting humility. If you ever stand on the edge of a desert and feel the silence pressing in, think of Gallus's legions. Think of the banners they carried into that emptiness and how the wind tore them apart. Think of how an empire that ruled the world met its match, not in another army, but in the endless patience of sand and sun. That's the legacy of the Roman invasion of Arabia Felix. Not victory, not conquest, but the simple reminder that even Rome, the eternal empire, could vanish into the desert. And maybe that's what history really is, not the triumphs carved in marble, but the stories half buried in dust, waiting for someone to uncover them again.